prioritizing self-care in your life and your journey with that, because you have lived in war zones all over the world. Your husband's a diplomat. You were able to go with him on some of these spaces and get jobs and work within that. You were left to deal with food that was available based on where you were. And there, there wasn't a grocery store always all the time where you could go get those great fruits and vegetables and grains and all those things you need. You were left at the whim of what they could get into you safely. And you were working 7 days a week at times in these spaces, and all of these, but also like a lot of, like you talked about, thriving off the energy of it while at the same time being terrified. I mean, there was a lot of emotions going on in all of this mix. And this is just I've read, she's got a book, guys. And that first chapter, I was just like, give me more. This story is wild. And so those are, but you've lived all over the world, but you've had to deal with the complexities that brings as along with the excitement and adventure. So talk to me about your self-care journey.
Yeah. And it has been a journey, Melissa. I can say, like, honestly, in Iraq, I was not practicing probably the best self-care. You learn it. You live and learn, all the things. Like sometimes you could say, if I knew then what I know now, I would have done things probably differently. But it was such a 24/7 cycle of work, playing in like a very small compound, I would say, so that's like, alcohol and all sorts of things going on. And so, I wasn't prioritizing. There was a gym. So sure, we were working out, but you can also overwork out, right? That becomes not self-care.
Yeah.
But it's also really good for your mental health in many ways. And so I think I went for many years, not really having a good self-care practice, honestly. And I can see that when I got sick with Lyme, which we can talk about later, that is when I had to hit pause.
Yeah.
There was no other option in my life.
Yeah.
And that's when but I also had a baby and a toddler. So, practicing self-care became a must. And now it is something that is a non-negotiable in my life.
Yeah.
And something that I work on for myself every day, and something I work with all my clients. I work with a lot of complexly ill people, and you don't have to be complexly ill to need self-care. We all need self-care, but as women, we have been taught to put others before ourselves.
Yeah.
That is society in general, especially in Western society. Yep. Self-care is selfish. And I try to teach people that self-care is healthcare.
It is. Yes. I love that. That's a great tagline.
It is really healthcare. And if I don't take care of myself, I can't give my best self to my family. If my cup is not filled, then I am not the best person for myself, for my daughters, for my husband, for my friends, for those people who rely on me in many ways.
Yeah. You hit it on the net. I said that time and time again. I'm like, this idea that it's selfish is counterintuitive, because how in the world can we be good for anyone if we're not good for ourselves and coming from a full cup first and taking space to do that? And so
absolutely.
But you're right. We so many times, and I'm another example of that. And that's why I have these conversations, is we don't have to hit a wall, ladies, before we start prioritizing ourselves. Get on it early, make it a non-negotiable, so you don't get to these spaces and have to go down these more difficult roads. Yeah. Prioritize those things now. Make them part of your daily calendar, your daily schedule. Don't allow them to be kicked out by the busyness of the day. Remembering that you deserve that, you're worth it, you're valuable. And also you want to show up as that filled person, because when you're not filled, when you're coming from an empty cup, you're crabby, you're irritable, you're tired, you get sick. I mean, there's just so many things that come into play that don't.
Absolutely. And your body starts telling you, without a doubt. And so what I've had to do, because I'm a go kind of person, I've really had to work on that through my illness journey.
Yeah.
is scheduling that self-care.
Yeah.
You know, okay, so these days a week, I have my mindfulness class. For me, self-care might look like taking my dog for a walk or just sitting in the backyard and quiet. It doesn't have to be expensive, because I think a lot of people think self-care, I have to go to the spa or something like that.
Or pay for a gym membership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can be a walk in your neighborhood or, you know, in your city. It can be sitting in the quiet spaces for just a few minutes of the day. It doesn't even have to take that much time.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important. It's a non-negotiable.
Yeah, it is. It is in those quiet spaces to allow yourself to just kind of take a breath. Yeah. But I think sometimes as women, we're afraid to sit in the quiet because other things that we need to tend to or deal with start coming to surface, and we want to push those aside because we don't think we can prioritize those, or they might be hard to deal all those things we've pushed down, taking care of everybody else. So it takes some kind of like commitment to yourself, knowing your value, and a little bit of discipline to be like, no, I need to do this. This is important.
Yeah. You are worth taking care of.
Exactly. That right there. Within that had to come some healthy boundaries or an evolution of healthy boundaries. I mean, you know, when you're working 7 days a week, you're on call 24 hours. There's not many boundaries existing within that kind of life.
There are no boundaries. And that was, you know, for a year in time. And I could say you can do anything for a year or whatever, but you need to have those boundaries. And that's, again, something I think I've learned when I got sick more than anything, was to put those boundaries in place, because I don't necessarily look sick. You know, it's not like I'm walking around with a broken arm or something like that. And people can visualize the sickness. But I have to be able to be okay with saying no. And that's hard for me because I'm a people pleaser. Yeah. But, you know, it's okay to say no. Yeah. You know, absolutely. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay not to do all the things. Yeah. You know, I was just working with someone yesterday. I was like, what are the things that we can take off your plate? Yes. Yeah. You know, not everything has to be done, but we live in this world where as women, we are giving 24/7. We might as well be working 24/7 on call all the time. Honestly, because you think about how many of us struggle to shut our brains down at night so we can go to sleep, because it's spinning of all the things that we think we need to be doing, remember all the stuff. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's important to, if you're having a hard time putting boundaries, to work with someone who can help you. A lot of times we need those prompts, you know, to figure out what those boundaries are and where we can place them. I think it's, you know, it's okay, and it's in saying no, but it's also in boundaries from people that take your energy that you don't necessarily need to be encountering all the time, or allowing them to take that energy from you. So the boundaries can be really multifaceted and very unique to each individual, but nonetheless, they're important for everybody. Yeah, that list thing is so important. And we talked about that before, but it's really powerful every once in a while to write down all the people, places, and energies that you're giving away, and figuring out which of these align with me, and listen to your body, listen to that inner knowing. It will tell you whether you're out of alignment on some of those things. If you walk away and someone has just depleted the heck out of you, you need to reanalyze that relationship and how much time it's safe and well for you to give to it. And in same place, you know, you moved into, you know, all of a sudden you became a mom and had small kids, and you still have this life that you had to like build the life around, and create space for that to be your best for that. But then, you know, you've started dealing with these illnesses, and we're going to go into, I told you before you started this, you are a poster person for the effects of our connection of our mental, emotional, and physical health. You started because of these in kind of wild environments you were in, you started seeing in your body, you started, you know, Lyme disease, Hashimoto's. And this, I feel like this journey probably is what catapulted you into the holistic medical practitioner world that you do today. You also had the, I think, probably advantage of living throughout the world and learning different practices from different cultures and what worked for them. You talked about early on falling in love with Jordan and
to this day, they have the best breakfast you've ever, so, so being able to take those observing those things, even as you're struggling and figuring out what's happening in your body. But talk to me about this mental, emotional, physical health journey for you.
Sure. I mean, I think it's often discounted, the mental emotional connection and just the power of it and how necessary it is to have both wellness and emotional and physical health. Because I had lived in Baghdad and then Beirut, those were very, very like go, go, go environments. They also had a very big, element of danger or perceived danger. And so that was already ramping up health issues because you're living in that fight or flight.
Where your cortisol levels had to be like this. Oh my gosh, off the charts.
They were huge and then they were nothing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the fluctuations, what that had to do to your hormones.
Yes, right. Which we didn't know because then we were also trying to get pregnant at this time. And obviously that, we had a lot of issues with that as well. But, it all really came to a head because I had just pushed through a lot of the emotional journey of living in some sort of frightening situations, going through various frightening situations with my husband's job and things like that. Our struggle with getting pregnant. And then when we were living in Nigeria, we were there when COVID started. And there was a lot of, I'll just say trauma with us trying to leave the country. It was a very, it was a very stressful time. We kept trying to get on these flights. The flights kept getting canceled. They're just these very emotional moments in that time. And ultimately, I left the country with my daughters, but my husband had to stay behind because in his job, he's always going to be one of the last ones there until we turn the lights off.
Sure.
And I returned to Seattle to stay with my mom, but I had to go into like a quarantine house because it was early 2020, April of 2020.
Just got smacked.
Yeah, and we had no idea. What it was early on. So all the implications. So we're in this quarantine house and I had just traveled across the world with my kids. And,
oh my gosh,
we didn't know when we were going to see my husband again. We had to leave the dog behind, with my husband, Craig. And I fell apart. Like I was literally having nightmares every night. I was the safest I had been in years. And yet I was the most afraid.
Wow.
And so it was crazy. And my mom ended up having to like come in at night because she didn't want to really be around us because we didn't want to make her sick,
Sure.
And she would come in the night and just stay in the guest room so that I could sleep and then leave early in the morning. And I was diagnosed with PTSD. I also didn't feel worthy of that diagnosis because I was like, who am I? That's for like our military personnel and people who've been through sexual assault and all of these like really huge, very terrible things and that are hard. And who am I to have this? So that was something that I had to really, and then I was like, oh, I'm weak. All these things that go
all these stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because I'm reading your story. I'm like, well, no one, I hope you had PTSD because my God, the corkscrewing into these countries because so you wouldn't, your helicopter doesn't get, or plane doesn't get shot down. The helicopter rides you were on just early in those early days. Yeah. And the attacks, like always having to be ready to dive undercover because of attacks that might become mortars that might be coming. I mean, that is not small. But I can understand what you're saying though, because you're like, it's a diplomat's life versus the military that are on the front lines. And, so we tell these stories and we try to minimize these things that have happened to us. And we don't, but yet when you say it to someone else, I'm like, well, my God, if you hadn't had PTSD, I would have thought you weren't human. I mean, it's just really wild, but it's so interesting, the stories we tell ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think, at that time, at least in the State Department, there wasn't a huge, look at our mental health. And I think after having people in war zones for 20 years, there is now much more action around that.
Yeah.
But we're also you don't want to be that weak one, you don't want it to go in your record. There's so many, like you said, stories we tell ourselves where we're
the
not
stigmas
honest
too.
with what's happening.
You talk about, you don't want it to be on your record. There's still a lot of stigmas around these things.
Yeah. And so people then, aren't engaging in the healthiest behaviors to cope.
Yes. And you explained that really well. You described your first stop there, I think it was in Baghdad, as a frat party. In some ways, which I think it's funny, but also people are just desperate to find a way to cope, and it just desperate to numb for a while and not be terrified and not be scared, and so and desperate
and not be lonely,
desperate to connect with someone, even if it's completely unhealthy. The human spirit, the soul, has this need for these things. And so even within that, the things that you don't have access to cope, so you turn to this, whatever's available, and that has an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it was no surprise, I guess, no great shock when I was diagnosed with PTSD, but it just brought to light a lot of things that I hadn't been doing, that, it was a huge learning process. Because I was already had Lyme since 2015 at that point. So it was also in 2017, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. Again, some of that's your genetics, but it's also your environment and your body reacting to your environment.
It
right?
is.
And so, it, again, not shocking.
Right. And that's a lot to deal with, especially when you're moving around and you've got a family and you're trying to keep all these things in balance, but it's not like you're just living in your home or space that you've been in for, 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, it's constantly changing, and, it's exciting and an adventure, and you get to see cool things. And also, does it have stability to probably find consistency in your healthcare and your diet and even your self-care and what's available to you?
Absolutely. And every place you go is different. Some places have great options for inexpensive self-care. We lived in Cambodia. You can have massages for $10, $15, so there's places that do have those options, if that's something that works well for your self-care. But, in Baghdad, we didn't have all of those options. And same in Lebanon for some respects. You did, but it was a little bit more limited just because our movements were limited. Yeah. And, but it's also, you're reinventing yourself all the time, which is a skill and, something I'm good at now. Sure. But it's also tiring. Yeah. And then you're always switching out of your schedule and like you said, so there's just a lot of things that played into that.
Yeah, absolutely. All those connect points. Wow. So what did you get before we move on to the next thing? What are some of the things you learned that you've kind of melded into your practice now, from being in all these different spaces?
A lot of power of Eastern medicine for sure. I think the power of of traditional medicine, in that not that what we do as conventional medicine, so to speak, right. But those traditional medicine practices really from country to country, they may differ, but there's a lot of validity to them. We do very well in the Western world with trauma medicine and cancer treatments and things like that. But we really don't do a lot of preventive health. So it's also that
it's always reactive.
Yeah.
So
that's what I do. I work with people that are sick, but also how do we prevent?
Yeah. And just have a good day to day.
Good day to day. How do we learn to thrive, and not just survive? So I think a lot of those practices, and just empathy, really empathy for everybody's journey, because it's all different. We live in a world that's constantly judging.
Yes.
And so I think that I've learned so much empathy.
Yeah. And just people's stories and the complexities and nuances. I think that we lose and forget the nuance of things and go to being judgmental instead of curious. And I know that's a practice I've really tried to move into, is curiosity. And you didn't really have a choice. You kind of had to learn those things as you went through, but probably in that way has created this empathy and understanding and appreciation for the nuance in people's stories and how they
absolutely,
and how it affects decisions that are made and lives that are lived and stances that are taken around the world.
Nothing is ever black and white.
No, it's not.
Most of life is lived in the gray.
It is. And if we could accept that as the constant instead of trying to make everything black and white, I think we would approach things in a much more nuanced, healthy, curious manner too. I mean,
I agree.
Yeah. How we can support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically. I feel like this is a skill that you have really harnessed through this journey of yours. And now what you're doing and how you're helping people. Talk to me about your journey with that. And because we hit on some important things early, that these narratives that women hear that we've got to break down, break through, and so that we can live as our most authentic, healthiest selves.
Yes. Helping other women is something I'm very passionate about. To not blame ourselves. We really tend to blame and shame ourselves. Women also tend to blame and shame each other.
Yes. And we turn against each other instead of lifting each other up is what we need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's my hope to help lift women up. And it's something that I've learned in this journey is, how much women have been left behind medically, not taken seriously, told that they're fine when they're clearly not fine. But their journeys and their symptoms are discounted to, instead of just looking like they just want to look at the numbers on a page. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Those lab numbers are these values or whatever. And so it's for me to help with the self-advocacy part of that, because if I had not been a self-advocate for myself, that's something I'm very tenacious and a self-advocate, then I don't know that I would be better.
Right. You just had to keep demanding answers. And getting and especially as you were moving around, how was that trying to get diagnoses and information as you were always kind of in flux with your locations?
It's so hard, with anybody, whether you're moving internationally or you move a lot domestically or whatever. It is hard when you do not have continuity of care. I think it's hard enough when you do have continuity of care in this country. Honestly, I see it with my clients all the time. They're still falling through the cracks. However, like in some places, it was really great. It just depends on not only who you are working with at your embassy or consulate, but also the availability of the things you need on the local healthcare economy. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's all about that practitioner who's willing to listen and hear you.
Yeah.
And go the next step for you.
Yeah.
A lot of times now we work in this healthcare model. A lot of people do that they don't have the time to do that. So that's where I come in, I have the time to dig into this. Let's find the root cause of what's going on instead of just bandaid.
Yeah, that right there. I started going the holistic medicine route in probably 2017 because I was just so frustrated. I didn't know what perimenopause was until I was well into it. No one said I didn't know I never heard the word. Like I did not only know what it was, I didn't know it was a word like that. And so I started moving into that realm, and I'm still figuring things out as I'm in those coming out of peri and into the menopausal piece. But I started with going the holistic route because I wanted to know why. Don't just look at these 6 or 7 different things that are happening and throw a separate prescription at it. There's got to be a connection here.
Yes.
And that's there's got to be a connect point of why this is happening in my body. These are not all mutually exclusive. So why? And getting with a practitioner that will ask, how's your day? How's your stress? What's your job like? How are things at home?
How are you sleeping?
How are you sleeping? What's your diet like? What, do you have a self-care routine? All of these things, have stressors in them that contribute to what's happening in our bodies. And I mean, the example I often use is I was initially put on blood pressure medication until I'm like, I don't think I have a blood pressure problem. My blood pressure is not like this all the time. What I did have, eventually finally got, was an anxiety diagnosis that I'd had for years. Like, it got amped up when I went into peri, but ask my husband, he's like, no, we've been waiting for this for about 31 years. So we're happy we finally got it. And once I figured out the tools to managing that, there was no blood pressure issue. So instead of me being on a blood pressure medication that I didn't really need to be on, because that was a result of the core thing that was happening, within me. And that core thing had a connection to other traumas and emotions that hadn't been resolved, that hadn't been processed, that now I still experience it, but not at the same degree I did before I started therapy and unpacking all this stuff. So I say all that to say, getting with somebody who will ask you these questions and make these connect points.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. And that's what I ended up doing is, luckily finding a Lyme literate doctor in Seattle. And again, that's somewhat like the Pacific Northwest is very, holistic leaning. So you have those options. Not everybody has those options.
They don't. My daughter in Bellingham has the most fantastic holistic practitioner that I'm so envious of. I have one here in California that I found. It's new enough. I've only been to her one time. I'll have another visit with her, but I think I found a good one here in California. Is better than a lot of places.
Sure.
But the Pacific Northwest is definitely, I mean, I was like, oh, I wish I could go to Sierra's doctor. It's fantastic.
That's great.
Yeah. But you're right though. It is much more, I think, accepted and practiced, just our way of life in the PNW. Like, people out, when I would move, I've lived all over, not like you all over the world, but I've lived all over the country. And I never thought of myself as a granola girl, but I go live other places and they're like, oh, you're so granola. I'm like, am I? I don't know. I think that's just what I've always known since I was, 10 years old.
Right. Yeah. It's vastly different in different regions of the United States, just how, you can go with holistic care, who can practice holistic care. You're not allowed to practice in some states. So there's just this, people then don't have all the options, a lot of times where you can work with health coaches, but you can't always work with doctors, So, I was lucky to continue to self-advocate, find that team in Seattle, and then ultimately work with Dr. Fox, who I was his patient. He helped me become, get better, and now we work together. So that is like that full circle moment. But I'm sorry, I totally got off on a tangent there.
No, that's good. No, I wanted to know though, because it was good to hear kind of how your evolution of all of this stuff came together, and that gathering of information and seeing different things in different places that brought you to this place. But that self-advocacy piece, that keep asking questions. Don't accept that it's in your head or just, the random pill that's thrown out without any resolution. There is a place for prescriptions. I'm not saying that.
Absolutely.
There's a place for prescriptions. There's a place for those types of things. But
100%.
Too many times you've got 20 minutes in a doctor's office and they're not getting into, not asking the deeper things where there might be something you can do with a dietary adjustment or a supplement change, or just, recognizing some trauma that needs to be processed. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it.
And I think the trauma piece is something that is often overlooked because until you work on that part of things, it's going to be hard to fully heal from anything. And that's sometimes a really hard pill for people to swallow. And something I love to ask my clients is, what happened? Did anything happen before you started feeling sick? Because some people will be like, in 2012, this happened to me and I just have never been the same since. Well, what happened 6 months prior to that in your life, in your work? And you'll often see a death of a relative, a loss of a job, an infection, or, it could be something as generalized as that, but that can often help lead down this path of discovery of some of the root cause issues to people's health issues.
Absolutely. And you said something important earlier, but I wanted to go back and touch on it. The fact that when you got to Seattle, even though you were physically the safest you'd ever been, you were terrified and all these nightmares and things started happening. I think sometimes our nervous system just won't release all this stuff we're stored until it senses we're in a safe place to process it. Would you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was really living in a very fight or flight mode for many years, you know, and then I get to this space where I'm safe and my nervous system was like, okay,
all right, it's time to release all of this. We can't carry it all.
We're just releasing it all. Yeah. And then, you know, I had major nervous system dysregulation.
God,
but, you know, your body can hang on for a long time.
Yes.
You know, but it is constantly giving you clues.
Yeah, constantly giving you information. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for how you've taken this and you're helping women now with this because it's such important information. I look forward to the day where this is available for people everywhere and that everyone has access to it and and that it's covered and it's financially feasible for people because, you know, we're talking about it now. It's more readily available. There's still a lot of access issues that are happening for people. And so just letting people know that this is out here and it's available is so important. So women, you can start advocating for yourselves and for each other and looking for these things. Ask your doctors these questions that you're hearing us talk about on here. Mm-hmm. That's how we take care of ourselves. And that's how and share that information with other women so we can figure this out together.
Yeah, absolutely. And the access is something that, you know, I constantly think about and how do we create this better environment because it's expensive.
It is.
And it's not available to everyone in every place. I mean, telehealth now is, but like, I feel like it's this, you know, thing that so many people cannot afford. And that hurts me every day because I want it to be available to everyone. But we just have to our country has to come up with a better system.
We do. Yeah. That's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah, it is. But you know, it is not equitable at this moment and we need to work towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of that. I have to believe this became a really important part of you being able to get down this road, get on a healthy path, set your healthy boundaries is coming back to your why and your values in everything you do. Talk to me about that journey for you.
I think it's very easy to get lost in the noise of the world and your situation and lose sight of who you are and your value in the world and the why. You know, there were times that I really didn't know my value or my why, you know, because it was changing. Like I went from working to getting sick to having babies to not working to try to get better. And it's the sort of like, who am I? I mean, we all go through this in some aspect, right? Yeah. It's just that every story is a little different. But I think it's really important to try to come back to that, to have it written down somewhere, to be able to focus in on why you're doing that thing at that moment. Because that can change, right?
Absolutely.
Your value doesn't change.
Right. That's so important. Thank you for making that differentiation. Your value is a constant, but your values and your why and your motivation for doing things, change as you go through different seasons, learn things, just move, you know, all these things come into play.
Exactly.
But thank you for that differentiation. That's so important for us to remember.
Yeah. So I think it was just always trying to remember to come back from that because otherwise you can really lose yourself.
You can. Especially, I mean, I think women in general, we run into this and we struggle with this because we've got all of these balls we're bouncing and roles we're playing and we can get lost in those assignments and titles and expectations. And it's so important. You said, sit down every once in a while, write down what you're doing and why, and make sure it's still in alignment, and make sure something, because things are going to get out of balance. Things are going to change.
Absolutely. That's life.
Exactly. Life gets busy. It gets a little crazy and wild and out of sorts at times, but value yourself enough and know you're worthy of taking that time to continue to make your care and your wellness a priority, and making sure you're in alignment with how you're spending your time in your life is a big part of that. Is such an important part of that. Living out of our own expectations versus others' expectations. I would imagine this has been a wild ride for you with these spaces and places you've lived in and been a part of.
Yeah. It's interesting. My own expectations, we tend to be harder on ourselves, I think.
Absolutely.
With our expectations,
Yeah.
But I was, I'm successcul, I'm this, and now I'm this chronically ill person. And then what could have, should have, would have done differently to not get sick, right? Like we do that to ourselves all the time, especially as women. I tend to find that men generally just go on and are like, okay, like
this happened. All right. And
this happened, move on. And we wallow in that. We mull it over in our heads. We don't sleep because we're thinking about it,
Yeah, we eviscerate ourselves over these things.
We really do. And for me, that has been just such a journey of self-discovery in just coming to terms with how my life turned out differently in many magical ways.
Sure.
But those expectations that I had set up for myself didn't necessarily come to fruition.
Yeah.
Not always upset about it, but sometimes I am.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, these are these goals and expectations I had for myself.
Yeah.
And I didn't reach them, but I did these other things. You know? So I think and that's tied to our value.
It is.
Right?
It is 100%. Yep. Yeah. That's a really good explanation of that. And it goes really nicely into accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. All those parts of our lives. You said it, some expectations met, others not. But in exchange, you had all these other experiences that were amazing and incredible. And you probably couldn't have imagined as a kid growing up that you would have the life that you've lived. At the same time, there were some consequences ingrained in the beauty and excitement and adventure. So accepting all those parts of that. And then it's really hard when you have these health diagnoses that come with stigmas and sometimes some really difficult changes in how you're living your life daily so that you can be healthy, and accepting those and accepting that you might be a little mad about it for a while. You might have some grief you need to work through, but accepting all those pieces and coming to a place of contentment and acceptance of all those things. So talk to me about your layers journey.
I think it's something I'm still coming to grips with, right? I think our layers are always changing. We're always finding new layers of things. Something I talk with my clients, like we took this medicine or this supplement, and we're working things through, and we found another layer. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we as humans are always finding these other layers to ourselves. And I've done a lot of work, seeing a therapist and an energy healer around these layers. Yeah. Because I tend to be very hard on myself, harder than anybody else. So, just accepting that I can't give 110% all the time. Like I never thought I was going to write a book. And then I wrote a book, and then I had like a terrible Lyme flare because I really overdid myself. Yeah. But that's just, I push and I push and I push. So it's like accepting that I can't, realizing that I have to slow down, that this is part of who I am, and being okay with that, and really serving that part of myself, because it's important to continue on that health journey, which is where the emotional, mental, and self-care stuff comes in too.
Absolutely.
Something that we want to push away. So, I think for me, it's an evolving journey. And there's the layer of motherhood and being a wife and a daughter and a business owner and, all of these things that are constantly at pull with each other. They're not always synchronized.
They're not.
It's always a symphony. Yeah. And so it's, I think, understanding that it's messy and embracing the messy.
Yeah.
And that's really hard because, again, we're like, it's black or white. No, it's messy, it's all gray.
Yeah. And that's how a majority of life is lived. And I said this earlier, I'm like, we can embrace the fact that the only constant in that life is gray. That's the constant. Yeah. That's the thing we can depend on. Because there's just so many complexities and layers to it. It's like getting okay with that and seeing the beauty and mess of all that and just being like, this is what this is. And this is why it's so important that I remember my value. And this is why it's so important that I continue to take care of myself, that I continue to ask myself the important questions, making sure my life is in alignment with the things I care about and giving myself grace when I push too far, because I can totally relate to that. I've mentioned this a couple times, but I had a friend mention to me a while back, she's like, you're running at a frenetic pace right now. And it's too much. And you've got to, and I stepped back and realized that I was confusing my audience. I was delivering halfway on different things, all in this thing that I was grasping at, that I was trying to force into being, and rather than letting things happen and trusting my intuition on what was and wasn't good for me. And also just accepting the fact that it's been a hard couple of years, and I've had a lot of losses over the last couple of years, and I'm still absorbing those and so allowing ourselves the space. I think that's what can be so tricky, is allowing ourselves the space and the grace to show up the way we want to, but also giving ourselves the room to process and move through, and know that those things don't always have a strict timeline. They can come up and show up in different ways, and giving ourselves grace in those moments,
Yeah. And that's not something that we're taught, or society really looks at. Like, we're an instant gratification society. And we're going to put this thing into the world and we want it to happen right now.
Yes. And we have all these visions of how it's going to be.
Yeah. We're going to be better, and it's going to be right now.
Yes. The right now piece. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that that's part of the layers, is, like you said, is allowing that space and time. And then that goes into the boundaries. Like, all of these things are connected, and our relationships with others, right? Because we have to then create that space, because it's likely not going to be just handed to us.
No, it's not just going to be readily available 100%. Yeah. And I will tell you, I mean, I've read the first chapter. Your book is really well written. Like, a lot of people write stories that need to be told, and it's good that they did, but they're not necessarily like, this is a really well-written book. This is an important message. I'm glad I got it. And yours, I felt like I was with you. And I worked for a group called Her Story when I was in New York for a couple of years, where they use memoir as storytelling. So I'm pretty familiar with what it's like to feel like you're in the moment of something. And you do that so well. But that also takes a lot of energy. Like, there is a mental and emotional labor that goes into that. And so I would imagine realizing, and maybe not realizing when you went into it, that maybe the impact it was going to have on your body.
Yeah. I think it was the greatest gift I gave myself for self-discovery and healing.
Sure.
But it also, the upside down of that is that it really taxed me. I had to tell my stories of miscarriages multiple times, because you don't just write the book one time and then you're done.
Right. You've got to reread. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And rewrite it. The story of my husband in Syria with the mob, which you're going to get to here soon. A very scary situation with my daughter in Cambodia. There's just multiple things that the loss of my ex-husband, who died suddenly a couple of years ago, just a lot of different things that happened that I had to write and rewrite and rewrite. And every time I had to rewrite it, it took something from me.
Sure.
It healed in some aspects, but it also just the emotional pull of writing the book. And I actually, and I wrote it because this is how I am. My husband was like, you should really tell your story. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm a very private person, and I'm, here I am putting my whole life or
I know.
half my
it's
life
very vulnerable and scary.
Yeah, exactly. To do it. So I started it on New Year's Day, and I finished it by Mother's Day, 2023. But so like in 5 months, I wrote the rough draft. And so then I'm writing like 1,000 words a day at least, and then we moved internationally that summer. So I sent it to my editor. They're editing while we're moving. I'm trying to set up house. We're buying a house. We're doing all these things. I'm getting the edits back, trying to edit. And then I publish it the week after Thanksgiving. So it's like,
wow, that was a really quick turn.
Yes. So then this last 6 months, I've been like, oh, yeah, I really did myself in.
Yeah.
This is a lesson to me and to those I help to remember.
Yes.
That it's okay to not do things at 110% all the time, but also hard to remember, especially if you're very like driven
and motivated. Yeah.
Motivated, passionate individual.
Well, and if you've got timelines, you've got a family, you're thinking, okay, this is where I've got the space. I gotta knock this out right now because these things are coming in my schedule. And I know I won't have the space or time for it. And that gets tricky too. So I think, being patient in the unfolding and listening to our bodies is sometimes hard. Patience isn't something that comes easily and not in our society, especially. So thanks for sharing that. I think it's important. And I wanted to share my piece of it too, mostly because I want women to know they're not alone in this. So we all confront this in our own different ways. And it's a continual learning process. And we can have all the tools in the world and we still have to be reminded sometimes. And we sometimes even get slapped around a little by our own bodies to like, whoa, wait a minute, shake yourself here. Yeah. You're going down this road again. So thank you for that. I appreciate that so much. In Living Out Feel, which you have done so beautifully, and finding empowerment and embracing layers, talk to me about how that has affected your relationship with yourself as well as your relationship with other people.
I think that for me, it's been life-changing to embrace Phil. I feel like a lot of myself, I don't want to speak in generalizations for everyone, but I have often lived to please other people.
Yeah.
But in finding that empowerment and sort of embracing my own layers, I learned to live for myself while taking care of those around me, right?
Yeah, which we can do. And that's how it should be done. Yeah.
But it's so important for me to be empowered in my own self and to remember my value as a human being. And then I can translate that to help other people. And I hope that through my book and my work, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And some people don't like that. So when you ask about how relationships work, some people are there for a season and they don't like this new version of you or how you become empowered or whatever your thing is. And so you may walk away or, just distance from some relationships, and some relationships grow when you are empowered and embracing your layers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. So good. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That was so good. And you hit on something, and I want you to continue with this thought of not all relationships are going to stick with you on that. And it really becomes clear on who wants to see you thrive as much as you want to see yourself thrive versus those that may not be, they haven't done their own work or they just want you to continue to showing up that other way. There's so many things that go into it.
Yeah.
And sometimes relationships just have a season, but talk to me about that now that moving into that space of realizing that, which can be hard, but also seeing the benefit of being surrounded by those people that are for you authentically.
For you. Yeah. I've had, I would say like my mom and my best friend who I feel like the book is also just a really great story of our story of my best friend and myself. And she has been with me through everything. And so that has and I want to say like, we even had a few few years early on when we were both newly married and things like that, where we drifted a little bit because we weren't living close to each other. But then these last, I want to say 17 plus years, it has been, she has been there for me every step of the way through this. And I think that has been a beautiful thing. And that's something I loved writing about in the book. It is sad to lose relationships, though.
It is.
It is. I live in a very transitory lifestyle. So sometimes there are friends that are friends for a post and you don't really talk or hang out much after that. Right.
Yeah.
And there are those friends, like my friend Layla, who's in the book as well, who you meet, early on in your life, your career, and you're there and you talk every day, know? And so I think there are those people who are meant to be there as you grow and change as a human. And there are those people that are there for a blip in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's hard to not take that personally sometimes.
It is. It's hard. I think sometimes we try to put good and bad, going back to that black and white. Somebody did something wrong. And sometimes it's just, we just grow and change and go in different directions. Yeah. Nobody has to be the bad guy.
Exactly.
It just it's so many times more nuanced than that. And and getting okay with that, realizing it's not personal. It's just going in different directions. But we have a hard time with that. But I'm glad you brought that up. It's so important because it is a complex part of this layered journey. Even as we're growing into our most healthy, authentic selves, showing up in this way is not going to be for everybody. And that's okay. And that's okay. Yeah. And continue to being empathetic, being kind, all those things, but also accepting the nuances within that. And then that's okay.
Yeah. And I think as we go through like perimenopause and menopause, bringing that part in, we really learn a lot about ourselves in that time and I feel the most empowered than I have in my entire life. Yeah, me too. And so there's that essence of that season of life as well, which, so many women are like, oh, I'm going to be in my 40s and perimenopause. I'm like, no, one, there's tools that we can help make this much less
doesn't have to be so awful. Right.
But you're going to grow in yourself so immensely.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing.
And I think you have enough life experience. You just care less about what other people think. You're more inclined and driven to want to live out of your own expectations. You want to have the peace and contentment that life can have, and you want to have a piece of that. I feel more creative and my most authentic self. And I'm still working out some things. There's still some things in my the whole menopause and health journey and in therapy and all these things that I'm putting together and the pieces are coming together. But on the whole, I show up as my most authentic self unapologetically for the most part every day. And I've never felt more free. And I think that's something that comes with experience and time. And you're 100%. Able to kind of just release those things that really got to you 10, 20 years ago. You're just like, you know what?
And you brought something up, like that inner work, because a lot of that we carry those childhood expectations of teachers, parents, grandparents, whomever, ourselves.
Yep.
The trauma that is different for everyone, but there's very few people that have not experienced some sort of trauma.
Exactly.
And until we can get to that place where we're doing that inner work and releasing it, it's hard to be showing up as your most authentic self and being free.
It is, because you don't have the capacity. There's just so many things that you've got to release and heal and move forward from to make room for that space and capacity to feel the freedom, the wholeness, to uncover new layers and new parts about yourself. And, and I think that just is a part of the journey. Also, if you've been a mom, all of a sudden kids are older. In my case, they're out of the house now. I've got 3 20-somethings that they're all in their own spaces now. Our youngest is going to graduate from college next month. I mean, so we're just about there. And also just that created space and time to sit with myself that was uncomfortable for a while. That quiet was very disruptive because
you had to reinvent yourself a little bit because you were wearing
all these hats.
Layer.
Exactly.
All these hats.
These hats and layers were changing. Where my value was placed had to be evaluated. Learning who I was in this season of my life. But it also, if you can embrace it, it creates immense capacity to really go on some great adventures that I would have never imagined for myself. And I think for sure you can say the same thing too with the empowering work that you're doing today. So thank you for that. So good. We are down to the rapid fire, and then I'm going to give you a moment to share all the ways people can learn about you, work with you, follow you, get your book, all those things. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Time with quiet, like just me.
Yeah.
No noise. So that could be like a mindfulness or, meditation time, or just sitting outside and enjoying the quiet. Massage, travel for sure is something that nourishes me. Walks with my African village dog, and really time with my girlfriends. I love having that time with them.
I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's come up a few times on different episodes. Don't undervalue that time with your girlfriends, ladies. That space matters. It is a big part of who we are, and that connection and community. Make the space for that. That adds so much richness to our lives. And I think sometimes those are the first things that we put off to the side when they really need to be some of the most important things we cherish and make space for. So
absolutely. That's what, community is undervalued in our country, in the Western world, I think. And that's something I have learned living abroad, where generations live together and friends and families live close to each other, is that value in community. And something that I found in living in compounds and in expat communities is that community, and not undervaluing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So important part of that journey. And that's a part of how we help change narratives about women and how we show up in the world collectively together too. So powerful. Thank you for that. All right. And 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
I'm going to say healing, because I'm always healing from Lyme and Hashimoto's. It's never an end point, really.
Sure.
Centered, peaceful, because I think we're all craving a little bit more peace.
Yeah.
Excited. I get to travel. Since we've been back in the States, it's not as easy to just travel and hop on a plane. So I have some trips planned. So excited and nourished.
Okay. So good. Thank you so much for all of this today, Vashti.
Thank you.
Tell people how they can, and this will all be on our resources page, ladies. Don't worry. Go to embracinglayers.com. Look for Vashti Kanahele's episode. It's all going to be there. But share right now how all the ways we can learn about you, follow you, get your book.
You can find me on Instagram at Vashti Kanahele. And you can go to my website, vashtikanahele.com. There you can get a free copy of the book, or a free chapter of the book.
Yeah.
And then the book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble as well. And it's Passports and Parasites.
And Reese Witherspoon, if you are out there, you want to grab this book. This should be part of your book club. This thing needs to be made into a movie. I'm not joking. I'm not pulling punches here. That is the first thing. I read the first chapter. I'm like, holy cow, this happened to this woman. This was her experience. And what a fascinating, empowering, complex, nuanced story. So thank you for sharing it. Thank you for the emotional. Absolutely. And I want to honor the emotional labor again that required, because I don't think we stop to take that into consideration sometimes, especially as women, when we put this work out in the world, that it comes at a cost. And it's worth it most of the time. I hope all of the time, but not without some things to be considered in that journey. Mm-hmm. And for how you've embraced these layers. I mean, I think it's really hard when you are dealing with illnesses that are with you for always. We want to see an end point. We want a checklist. We want a list of things to do, and it's going to be fixed and it's going to be better. And it's very difficult when you get a diagnosis where that's not the case, where it's going to be a continual process of life management and healthcare to continue to be able to thrive and live the life you want to live. So thank you for sharing that too, because that's difficult and that's hard. One of my very best friends got a Hashimoto's diagnosis when our kids were teenagers, and she was in the throes of busy life, and the choices she had to make within that because her body was so exhausted. Like, of how she would manage her day while she was getting her body in alignment. It was difficult. It was so hard. And there's so many misunderstandings about that. So the next time you see that tired mom or that mom that can't show up at the school line in the morning or maybe on the field trip, instead of making assumptions, be curious, because you just never know what people's journeys are and what their bodies and their health require. So thanks so much for sharing that too. Audience, I'm telling you, you got to grab this book. You got to go take a look at what Vashti's doing. And know that these holistic practices are out there. If you're in the state of Washington or even Oregon, good on you. My youngest daughter's at Oregon State. A lot of those things are available in Oregon too. And in California, I found one. They're starting to come up in places, even places like West Texas, where I used to live in Lubbock. There's a few options there. It's starting to become more normal. There's things in New York. When I lived in New York, I was able to find a really good one there. They're around. You got to look. Also know, but from a resource standpoint, we've got a lot of work to do to create accessibility here. But know they're there. There's online resources. There's telehealth stuff. So but also if you're like, listen, the only thing I can afford is my current PCP. Don't settle. Ask the question.
Absolutely. Yes. And that is what I tell my clients, in states where they may not have the, accessibility or monetary ability to pay for a naturopath or a holistic practitioner. Don't settle. You can change doctors or continue to ask the questions. It is your right as a patient.
Yes.
To get answers.
Yes.
And not settle.
Absolutely. And that's where we'll close this today, ladies. Remember that. Thank you, Vashti, for your time. I've so enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You bet. All right, audience, take good care of yourselves. Prioritize your health. Get that healthcare provider that'll listen to you. You're worth it. And have a great week.